foreign editor at The Australian, Greg Sheridan. Greg, appreciate it as always. The government, as you heard there in Andrew's report, confident that Congress will relax those export controls, pivotal to the AUKUS agreement. That would be a welcome step, wouldn't it?
Yeah, Kieran, I must say, I think Andrew reported very accurately, but I think the Prime Minister's party is talking moonshine. The Congress has already decided not to give Australia blanket exemptions. So what we asked for was that Australia would be treated like part of America. They've said no to that. They haven't said maybe or we'll think it over. They've just said no. Now, what we're looking for is sector by sector exemptions, and probably those will come through on a one-by-one basis, especially if we're spending money on buying American kit. But it's very hard to distinguish the flummery from the substance in all this. These photo ops and announcements are one thing, but I'd love to see them actually implement something really happen. But how on earth any Australian travelling party can predict what's going to happen in Congress is beyond me. I think this is a line the Prime Minister's office is putting out, but I wouldn't have any confidence in it.
You've got that visit happening a week out from the first visit by a Prime Minister to Beijing in more than 7 years, Greg. How will the normalised relations between Canberra and Beijing be received in Washington?
Well, Washington's quite happy for everyone else to have normal, sensible relationship with Beijing as long as they don't sacrifice core national interests and core alliance interests. It won't have escaped Washington's attention that we're not doing anything in defence. I mean, Ed Husic has done two memorable things as a minister. He's broken cabinet solidarity on foreign policy and he's abolished the program to build our own satellite. So building a satellite was something we're actually going to do. We've decided not to do that. Instead, we're having grand announcements about the future. I think the government has slightly misplayed the China stuff. It's perfectly reasonable to want to stabilise the relationship. That's okay. But what they've done, in effect, is stop criticising China. They're not doing anything on defence at all. So there's no annoyance to China. They're not even putting Tomahawk missiles on the Collins submarines, which would make them a more lethal threat in the event of a conflict in the Indo-Pacific. And China still has one of our citizens hostage. I mean, China has played all this very, very well. It's done a lot of punishing things to Australia. And then as it removes the punishments one after another, you know, the Australian government is tremendously, pathetically grateful. And Albanese seems very keen to emulate Gough Whitlam's visit from 50 years ago. But that's all moonshine and flummery. The substance is much more important.
Two more hostages released in Gaza. Israel facing criticism over the humanitarian crisis unfolding there, and Australia right now seeking to evacuate some of our own citizens. It's a diabolical situation, Greg.
It's a terrible situation, and the moral responsibility for it lies entirely with Hamas. I think the Prime Minister's authority is weakened after the shockingly huge referendum loss, and that's why Ed Husic and Anne Alley were able to break cabinet solidarity. I noticed that Husic has come back in line today, but I would predict as this conflict gets more intense, it will be harder for Albanese to hold the line. Now, everything he said about this conflict in Washington today is very sensible. Of course, he's saying that for American ears to emphasise how united with the Americans we are, but I'm also a little concerned the Americans asking the Israelis to delay their ground offensive to allow more time to negotiate hostage release. Well, Hamas here is a little bit like the Chinese government. They're going to dribble out these hostages one or two at a time, weeks at a time, in the hope that that puts pressure through the Americans on the Israelis to stall. And then eventually the momentum for an Israeli action will dissipate. That's their hope. I don't think the Israelis are going to let them do that. But yeah, this is a desperate and terrible situation. Every decent human being feels sympathy for innocent civilians in Gaza. But Hamas, when it slaughtered so many Jewish people in such barbaric ways, it wanted this outcome. Hamas wants a lot of Palestinians to die to blacken the name of Israel, but Israel must remove the Hamas threat. No government would do less. Our government would do no less in similar circumstances.
The UK Foreign Secretary also pointed to something else that Hamas wants, and that is to draw in other players from the region. And that's the risk right now, that this spreads and gets worse.
It is a big risk. It's a very big risk. I've spoken to a lot of Israelis about this. Nobody knows whether Hezbollah will attack from the north. There's an argument for saying they will, to maximise Israel's distress and to turn the Arab world completely against Israel and the United States. But there's also an argument that they won't, because they're a strategic asset for Iran. And once they're used up, they're no longer a strategic asset. So the Israelis are determined to destroy Hamas. So Iran loses one strategic asset there. The threat of Hezbollah is primarily to protect Iran. So it may be that Hezbollah just keeps doing these small rocket launches just to sort of show that they hate Israel like everyone else in their little twisted clique of terrorists. But we just cannot know. And now the one area of delay the Americans are asking for, which is a bit more rational, I think, is they're saying that they want their own forces to be more fortified in the region, and they want to move more military assets into the region. So the United States and Israel and Britain, to some extent, are preparing for a wider conflict, and they hope that by setting up this very strong system of deterrence, they will deter a wider strategic conflict. But, you know, if I predicted what was going to happen to you, Kieran, I would have as much credibility as the Prime Minister telling you what's going to happen in the US Congress.
Yep, almost impossible, isn't it, to know where it heads. Greg, thank you for trying to track where it is at the moment. I appreciate your analysis as always.